福祉国家と呼ばれる寛容な国スウェーデン、人道主義を掲げ、大量の移民を受け入れたその結果、今国は大きな転換点に立たされています。アメリカでは今、移民対策を強く行っていますが、今回は実際に移民を受け入れてうまくいかなかったスウェーデンの現在を見ていきます。
Sweden has sadly suffered a mass migration disaster. In 2015, with the Syrian war, Sweden decided to lead the way, open their hearts to mass migration. Sweden had an all-time high of immigration in 2016, with over 160,000 people entering the country. In 2016, 2.14 out of 10.61 million of the population were now foreign-born. A rapid demographic shift, different attitudes towards women and gay people, and work ethic, with little policy or heed given to how to integrate communities. We have become very arrogant and cocky over our liberalism. Most places in the world do not have societies like this. They do not view freedom in the same way that we do. Our overconfidence that people will arrive in our countries and simply embrace these values with open arms without any strategy to integrate is really our downfall. Unfortunately, this has seen a huge rise of gang violence in Sweden, with Sweden now ranking the second highest per capita in gun violence in the EU, also has the highest rate per 100,000 of reported rapes than any other country in Europe. In fact, in 2018, 58% of all rapes and reported rapes were perpetrated by foreign people. And in the cases where the victim did not know the attacker of their rape prior to it occurring, 80% of the attackers were foreign-born. Islam has also had a sharp rise in Sweden. You could even see them electing a radical Islamist party as early as 2026. While virtually all Swedes identified as Christian from the 12th to the 20th century, this number has now fallen below 60%. And some scholars predict that the country will actually have a Muslim majority within this century.
Breaking: Sweden has more migrants leaving than arriving. Proof if benefits are taken away, they will deport themselves. This is true. So the migrant problem in Sweden has gotten so incredibly bad and so dangerous that starting in 2022, they made huge cuts to their benefit programs for non-EU citizens. What did they do? They required them to learn Swedish, to work, and integrate to access their welfare in a step-by-step program instead of just on arrival. They're also literally paying people to leave their country, $34,000 per migrant if they are to return to their home country starting in 2026. And since they've made all this changes to the benefit programs and welfare programs for migrants, for the first time in a decade, Sweden achieved net zero migration in 2024. And now there's more leaving than coming. And asylum applications dropped to record lows. But this problem got so bad for Sweden starting in 2015 when they let in 160,000 asylum seekers, which then in 2017, by 2017, their foreign-born population reached 20% of the total population. And statistically, these migrants were coming from Syria, Iraq, Somalia, and Afghanistan. Because of this, crime stats increased dramatically starting in 2015, and Sweden became known as the bombing capital of Europe. After they let in all these migrants, their crime stats grew so drastically. 73% of all murders in the country were done by migrants. 70% robbery done by migrants. 85% of all pew-pewings done in the country were migrants. They had a huge, heartbreaking increase in RAPE in their country. And by 2022, 75% of migrant households were on welfare or benefits. They had migrant-heavy neighborhoods that were called vulnerable neighborhoods. They had 55 of them where open drug trafficking and violence just became completely normal. Because guess what? These people don't want to assimilate. And it really got so bad that they finally said, nope, we're doing something about this. This is what England needs to do. We've got to stop pandering to this like sensitive movement. It's so crazy. It's going to cause the fall of the West. Good for Sweden for cleaning up their act, but they still have work to do because that was a lot of damage done. England needs to close its borders, cut all benefits for migrants, and start mass deportations. Otherwise, gone.
Sweden now officially has a city that is more dangerous than Baghdad. You didn't mishear me. Scandinavia, a place known for happiness, universal healthcare, ABBA and IKEA, now has a place that is officially as bad as a war zone. To put it in perspective, they had 31 bombings last month and they had a shooting every 28 hours during 2024. Last week, the Prime Minister just came out and admitted it and said, we have lost control of this wave of violence. What's mad is when I spoke to experts about what was behind this trend, they said a lot of the time the people orchestrating these crimes are actually based, ironically, in Iraq and Turkey. The explanation is simple. That reputation that Sweden had for being a friendly, welcoming place has been exploited ruthlessly by international criminal networks. They have exploited the immigration policies to turn the place into a really, really dangerous country. What do you think? Are you surprised that Sweden is so dangerous?
What if I told you that Sweden, the once peaceful, prosperous jewel of Scandinavia, has now been transformed into a war zone where bombs explode in the streets, gang violence runs rampant, and native Swedes are disappearing into the minority. Sweden was once a beacon of stability, progress and Nordic resilience, a nation that prided itself on equality, safety and a strong welfare state. But in the span of just a few decades, it has transformed beyond recognition. Uncontrolled mass migration has turned the country into a battleground. Crime has exploded with bombings, gang warfare and lawless enclaves where Swedish law no longer holds sway. And the most shocking truth of all, ethnic Swedes are now a minority in their own cities, their own communities, in their own country. It began under the guise of compassion. The Swedish government, in its pursuit of open borders and limitless humanitarianism, welcomed hundreds of thousands of migrants, many from cultures with values utterly incompatible with Sweden's own. These weren't families seeking a better life, they were overwhelmingly young men, many of whom despise the West, see it as weak and ripe for exploitation, and exploit it they did. Just look at the numbers if you dare. Sweden now has one of the highest rates of gun violence in Europe. Grenade attacks and bombings, once unheard of in these peaceful Scandinavian towns, are now a regular occurrence. In Malmo, Gothenburg and Stockholm, gang wars rage in the streets. Police stations, kindergartens and residential buildings have been targeted with explosives. What was once a country known for ABBA, IKEA and neutrality is now infamous with its no-go zones and spiralling violence. Rapes have surged. Sexual assaults, often carried out by men from radically different cultures, have shattered the sense of safety Swedish women once took for granted. But even worse than the crime itself is the government's response. Instead of cracking down, Swedish authorities, fearful of being labelled racist, have prioritised appeasement. So police officers warn women to dress modestly, to avoid going out alone at night. Concessions to an alien culture taking root in Swedish soil. And where are the Swedish people in all of this? Outnumbered in their own neighbourhoods, taxed to pay for welfare systems increasingly strained by those who contribute nothing at all. Their voices are silenced, their concerns dismissed as xenophobia, but the demographic shift tells the real story. Sweden is no longer a Swedish nation. It's a failed experiment in multiculturalism, an irreversible transformation into something unrecognisable. You want to know Britain's future? Look at Sweden. If you think the UK is immune, think again. Every week, boatloads of undocumented young men arrive on our shores, ferried in under the watchful eye of a government too afraid or too complicit to stop them. They come from cultures that reject our values, that see our kindness as weakness, that do not seek to integrate, but to dominate. It makes my blood boil. British taxpayers foot the bill, while working class communities bear the brunt of this disaster. Housing shortages, overstretched NHS services, rising crime. These aren't coincidences. They're the inevitable consequences of a system that welcomes everyone except its own people. If we don't act, we will follow Sweden down the same path. Soon we'll be the ones avoiding certain neighbourhoods, warning our daughters to stay indoors, watching as our identity is eroded in the name of tolerance. Listen, this isn't alarmism, this is reality. The time for politeness is over. The time for action is now. Britain must defend itself, or it will cease to exist as we know it.
Why exactly are there so many Syrian people in Sweden? Now, if you didn't know, there are lots of Syrian people in Sweden. There are a lot of Syrian Kurds living in Sweden, and there are also a lot of Syrian Christians, for example. And there's actually been a long history of Syrian migration in general to Sweden that's not often spoken about. For example, you had a lot of Syrians who migrated to Europe in the 1960s, 70s and 80s to find work. To be honest, a large factor as to why there's so many Syrian people in Sweden is due to the Syrian civil war, which started in 2011. In 2013, Syria became the first EU country to grant all Syrian refugees permanent residency. And Sweden traditionally has had a very liberal stance when it comes to, refugees. Even though it's changing now, and I am aware it is changing because of the growing right wing. But the Swedish model traditionally emphasized long-term integration over short-term relief, which made it more attractive for Syrians seeking permanent resettlement.
スウェーデンの問題は決して他人事ではありません。善意だけで制度を作れば社会は守れない。寛容さと秩序、そのバランスを失ったとき、国はどんな姿になるのか。この現実を私たちはどう受け止めるべきでしょうか。あなたはこの選択をどう思いますか。コメントで感想や意見を書いていただければ幸いです。最後までご視聴ありがとうございました。